You're listening to the Hello World Podcast, number 30. My name is Sean Wildermuth, and I am your host. The Hello World Podcast is where you can hear from some of your favorite developers, authors, and speakers about how they got started in this business. We go way back to their first computer, their first code experience, and their first job. On today's show, I have Ted Neward. Ted is currently the CTO of iTrellis, a team of experienced technology professionals who promote the continuous delivery of high-quality new services. He is an authority in Java and .NET technologies, particularly in the areas of Java and .NET integration. He is the author or co-author of several books, including Effective Enterprise Java, C# in a Nutshell, SSCLI Essentials, Server-Based Java Programming, and a contributor to several technology journals. Ted is also a Microsoft MVP architect, a BEA Technical Director, an INETA speaker, a former DevelopMentor instructor, frequent worldwide conference speaker, and a member of various Java JSRs. He lives in the Pacific Northwest with his wife, 2 sons, and 8 PCs. On today's show, Ted and I have quite a few laughs. We talk a bit about how he got started. We delve into the discussion whether to stay on a technology and become a master of it, or whether to head down the management path. We talk a little bit about Ted's mentors as well, and dive into a little bit of history of how he got started at DevelopMentor and teaching. Ted's always a good guest on any podcast he's on, and I think today's show is no exception. Let's take a listen. Well, this week on the Hello World Podcast, I want to welcome Ted Neward to the show. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good, Sean. How you doing?
I'm good. As you know, I'm in Paris, and you're a guinea pig. You're a guinea pig. We're trying to record our shows now from Europe with people that are everywhere, and so we'll find out, whether people enjoy the dulcet tones of the dude from long distance.
Well, I was just going to ask you. I mean, if you're in Paris, does that mean we have to do this in French? Bonjour, Monsieur Wildermuth.
No.
Comment ça va? Ça va bien?
The only languages I know have semicolons in them.
Oh, dude, that sucks. You don't even know JavaScript. That sucks.
No one knows JavaScript.
Yeah. Sort of reminds me of the old 80s. No one knows Bo. Oh no, wait. Bo knows everything. Never mind.
Bo knows everything.
Bo knows JavaScript.
Poor people got that joke.
Yeah, and they're all old like us.
They are old like us. So speaking of being old, how did you get started? Did you have a computer as a kid, or how did that go? Yeah,
I'm pretty much computer as a kid is the story here. Back in 1979, Dad was working for TWA, and those who are old will also remember that used to be an airline. And Dad got a Christmas bonus, and he later told me that it was kind of a 50-50 debate between him and my mother on either using the Christmas bonus as the down payment on a new Volvo or buying one of these newfangled computer things. And I actually wrote this in the introduction to one of the books I've written, where I said no decision my parents have ever made has had so much of an impact on my life as that one, with the possible exception of the decision of my father to marry my mother.
Sure.
Because he came home with a brand spanking new Apple II Plus, 64K of RAM.
More than you could ever use. I mean,
oh my God, yeah. I mean, what were you going to do with all that memory?
Just for our readers to be clear, he did say K.
Yeah, 64K, as in kilobytes. And initially came home with just, we hooked up the tape recorder because, you could actually put programs onto a cassette tape. How many generations old does that make me? And
a number of our listeners don't know what a cassette tape is. That's how old it is.
I know. It's so sad. And I feel like we should create a new degree in college, like, software anthropology or archaeology, software archaeology. You can go dig up all these references.
Exactly.
And that lasted for about a week because Dad got really tired of the screeching noise that the tape recorder made. So he came back with a floppy drive. And then like 2 weeks later, a second floppy drive. And oh my God, boys and girls, did we have the hot setup. Let me tell you, I mean, kids from school came over just to stare at the thing. And Dad actually had worked out a deal with the local computer shop where he would teach AppleSoft Basic classes at the computer store like once a week. And in exchange, they gave him, instead of paying him, they gave him hardware credits. He could use this as money at the store. And so he taught those classes for a while. So I was curious about this programming thing. So I sat in with him and learned how to do some AppleSoft Basic. And actually, at one point, I don't know if you remember the video game Punch-Out, the boxing game. Well, I wasn't any good at graphics, but I wanted to try to replicate that game. And there was and this is going back a ways too. You remember the old books that would have program listings in it, like basic computer games and more basic computer games and all those?
Oh, you mean the books, not like Compute Magazine, the books themselves. Yeah,
the big books. It was like a collection of all of those, different articles and whatnot that had listings in it. And one of them was a boxing game. So I said, I'm going to take that and I'm going to run with it. And, I ended up building a program that was like 5 or 6 times what was originally there.
Oh, wow.
And actually, ironically to your comment earlier, I actually exhausted the 64K of memory with all this AppleSoft Basic code. And, that was kind of my dive into programming, and got, I enjoyed it, but never thought about doing anything professionally with it. So, got to college, and a buddy of mine actually found a want ad for a programming job. And he said, dude, you should go interview for this. And I'm like, dude, Aaron, you're kidding me, right? I mean, come on, those guys are professional programmers. And then he did something that was absolutely underhanded and terrible and sneaky, and, for which I will forever hate him and love him in the same breath. He double dog dared me to go interview. Now, your new spouse, lovely as she is, will not understand the machismo that is involved in a double dog dare. If you don't rise to the challenge of a double dog dare, I mean, your manhood is now called into question.
Now, did he go straight to the double dog dare? Because that's a clear faux pas.
Oh, hell yes. I mean, he looked at me and
you have to start with a dare. Come on.
Aaron's a pretty deadpan guy to begin with, so he just looked at me and said, "Double dog dare you to interview." I'm like, "Oh, dude." And interestingly enough, I mean, he was right. In all seriousness, he was absolutely right. I went and interviewed, and out of like 35 candidates, I was one of 4 finalists, and ended up not getting the job. But that was a good thing, because I would have had no idea what to do if they had offered me the job.
Sure.
I mean, I was still full-time in school, had no real plans to not be full-time student in school. But it was a really clear wake-up call to me that, all of this programming that I'd been doing on the side was actually marketable. It was actually something that people wanted. And so after that, Aaron was actually one of my roommates in college, and our other roommate, Jesse, his dad was a researcher at IBM. And so I started talking to Jesse about, what's it like being a programmer? And Jesse's like, dude, don't worry about a degree. Nobody cares what your degree is. They care if you can write code. And so the 3 of us actually started working on a couple of different game ideas just to have some programming options. And, fast forward a couple of years, I interviewed with a startup out in Chicago and showed them, some of the code and some of the class diagrams and outlines and so forth of a portable GUI framework that I was working on across different platforms. And they said, wow, that's actually pretty impressive. We're going to hire you. And that was kind of how I got started.
Wow. Now, earlier you said that your dad was trading hardware for software lessons. Is it something he did, or was he just learning Apple Basic and then showing?
Yeah, he was just learning it as he went along.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Well, I mean, part of the thing is, Dad was extremely intrigued by the whole computer thing. And so it was certainly a labor of love. But, teaching most definitely runs in my family. My mother was a high school principal before she met my dad. I have an uncle who's passed away was the principal of a Lutheran high school in Chicago, Luther High North, if anybody out there is from Chicago and knows the name. My uncle was Roger Schmoe. I've got another aunt, my mother's older sister, who was kindergarten teacher for 25 years and then later came back and was the principal for that same school. On my dad's side, I've got, one aunt who was a school teacher for any number of years. And my father himself is a, very commanding presence in the front of the room. And he has taught, although not formally. So he has no problems with standing up in front of a room and telling them what to do. So, the whole teaching thing was really, really sort of endemic to my family. And, Dad basically picked up a book on AppleSoft Basic, flipped through it, said, this doesn't look that hard, learned it. And I mean, this was back in the day. And it's kind of hard for people to imagine now, but this is back in the day when we were all making it up as we go along.
Yeah.
I mean,
even more so than now.
Oh, hell yeah. Hell yeah. I mean, there were no formal training companies like we see today, DevelopMentor and Pluralsight and all of that stuff. It was all very, very ad hoc. We were just barely out of the age where people built their own computers, much less were, teaching formal classes. So it wasn't like there were labs and there weren't really slides and, we didn't even have overhead projectors. Dad would write on a chalkboard the syntax and the students in the room would, sit at the computers that had been set up and would play with that. And this was a classroom of 10 people and stuff like that. So, it certainly the bar was a lot lower than it is today. That's for sure.
And you certainly then came on the whole training idea pretty honestly. But let's get to that part in a bit.
Sure.
Let me go back to this first job. What language were you working in then?
Well, the company was a startup called Tangible Vision, and I will be forever grateful to those guys, particularly the president, Ram Tadachary. We were working out of his townhouse. It was a 2-story townhouse. His office was in the master bedroom because that just seemed rude to give it to anybody else. And sales and marketing were in the guest bedroom. And software engineering was in the landing between the 2 bedrooms. Customer service and sales, or customer service and QA were downstairs in the living room. And the dining room was our conference table, and the kitchen was the kitchen. I mean, there's not much you can do with the kitchen.
Yeah.
And I worked there for about 3 months. And, the VP of engineering there, a guy by the name of Hussein Dalmuti, I swear to you, I will remember this guy for the rest of my life. He is, in a lot of ways, he taught me a great deal about programming that had nothing to do with code. In terms of, code ownership, the idea of having some pride in what you do, the idea of, he welcomed, if you found a bug in his code, he was happy. He was glad because it meant that was a bug that a customer didn't find.
Right.
And, that thought was really just kind of brand new to me. And I'm very glad that I had him as my first boss because, the idea of not owning your code, the idea of not being proud at what you write and wanting to know that it was as good as it could be. I never had the opportunity to sort of think, oh, well, I don't want people to find bugs in my code because then that looks bad on me. It was more, we want the code to be good and we want it to be, sharp and whatnot.
And so that first experience, sort of formed that because we both know, people that we've run into in our experience that, they have that fear of if you find a bug in my code, that means that I might not know what I'm doing. And that means that you're going to figure out that I'm that I'm faking it all along.
Tapping into that whole imposter syndrome that so many of us feel.
Yeah.
I mean, it was great, and they were probably the best guys I could have worked for. Unfortunately, they were in Chicago, and Charlotte and Michael, my eldest, who was all of 6 months at that point, were still back in Davis where we were going to college. And so she was still in school in Davis, California, right near Sacramento. And she was still in school, so she couldn't really move out with me. So I was, away from my family. We were working long hours. And to be honest with you, I just wasn't mentally prepared for it. Sure. And about 3 months later, they said, look, it's not working out. You are clearly depressed. And I didn't realize it at the time, but you're clearly depressed. And this is not working out for us. We like you. We'd love for this to work out later, but go home to your family, finish things up there. And then, after that, we'll talk. And unfortunately, that was the last contact I've ever had with them.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, I've tried a couple times. Tangible Vision as a company didn't survive much longer. This was circa 1994, 95 timeframe. And quite honestly, I would love to reconnect with some of those guys and just sort of see how things were going. And I'd love to take Hussein out to dinner and say thank you so much. But I haven't been able to track them down. So if anybody listening, particularly in the Chicago area, knows of those folks and is, able to drop me a connection over LinkedIn or what have you, I would be eternally grateful. But at that point, came back home, took a couple of weeks off just to kind of, recover from the experience.
Sure.
And then a buddy of mine actually was doing some contracting for Intuit down in San Jose. Mm-hmm. And said, hey, they're looking for some more, Windows programmer bandwidth. Are you interested? And I said, oh, heck yeah. And so he introduced me, and then I spent, I think it was 3 or 4 months. I can't remember exactly how long, working on Quicken 5 for Windows.
And was that all C++?
I was all C++. Yep. Yeah, this was the mid-90s. This was the era of C++. Yeah. Java was still called Oak, and the idea of a runtime was still considered bad, and all of that stuff. Yep. So as a matter of fact, we were struggling with the 16 to 32-bit Windows conversions at the time. So that's how old this was.
So you got to enjoy the word thunk.
Oh, more than once. More than once. Yeah. So.
Yeah. Those were, I guess, fun times. I mean, we were employed, so I guess we can't complain too much.
Exactly. It was, there were some, if you go back and read some of the old literature, I mean, again, software archaeology here, if you go back and read at some of the things they did with Windows 3.0, in the early days, the memory management and all of that stuff. I mean, what they did makes sense. But, you look at it today and you're just kind of like, wow, people actually did that. And it's the same thing like you go to, the Wild West towns and you watch people going down to the river to beat their clothes against a rock to get them clean. You're like, really? People did that? Honest?
It's the only way to get them clean.
Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Absolutely. And so how long were you into it?
3 or 4 months. It was just a software contract. They needed some additional bandwidth to finish out Quicken 5 for Windows. As a matter of fact, my last day was the day they did the company release party. So big old tents out in the parking lot, and rotating spits with whole pigs on them and stuff like that. That was a big party. I mean, that's a big deal for Intuit.
Yeah,
and very shortly after that, I got started talking to the local contracting agencies in Sacramento, and there was a gig for a company called Access Health, which has since morphed several times into, I think they're called iMcKesson now.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And or they're part of iMcKesson now, I think. And that was the opportunity I had to work for Mike Cohn, who many people will know from his work in the Agile community, Agile estimating and planning, and Mike owns Mountain Goat Software and so on. My pithy phrase is that I knew Mike. Mike and I knew each other before either of us was famous. And as a matter of fact, I remember Mike showing me one of the very early papers describing Scrum. And, he said, well, what do you think of this? And I read through it and I'm like, this strikes me as complete hook'em. I mean, I can't imagine anybody actually building software this way. This is ridiculous. This is stupid. You should, there's no point. I don't understand why you're bringing this to my attention. Needless to say, Mike is a much smarter man than I am.
And more famous, clearly.
Oh, much more famous. And Mike, quite frankly, Mike and Hussein, between the two of them, were almost to this day, I think the best bosses I've ever had. In many respects, Mike is who I'm, sort of consciously emulating as I grope through the trials and tribulations of being a software development manager myself.
Sure.
Some of the things that he did, some of the approaches he took, him and Hussein both, it's like, wow, I really lucked out early in my career with working for these two guys.
Well, that brings me to a question that I sort of struggle with, in that you said these were the two best bosses you ever had, but in many ways it seems like they were also the best mentors. And do you think there's a difference, there's a line between those two?
In some respects, no. In some respects, yes. They weren't mentors at the time. Right. They were not, my job was slinging code, and Hussein was more of a mentor in the slinging code aspects of things. Mike was more of a mentor in the, how do I interact with my team? How do I, manage my team? Sure. What is my responsibility as a software development manager and whatnot? And so in many respects, Mike would be a mentor, but it would be a mentorship that was delayed by 18 years.
Sure.
Or probably more like 10 years, because after a certain point, even as I was working as an architect, you take on some of those leadership aspects. Mm-hmm. And Mike was really, really good about that. There were several times where I would just kind of sit back and think, what would Mike do in a situation like this? Hussein, we didn't have quite as much opportunity for the leadership mentoring because, engineering was him and a guy named Kevin and me. We were the developers. Yeah. That was it.
He was leading the team, not necessarily managing the team.
Yeah, exactly. We didn't have to do one-on-ones because we were sitting within 15 feet of each other.
Right.
It was a very, very hands-on environment. Mike, he was required by upper management to sit in an office with a window in it because that's what, directors did. Yeah. He actually wanted to sit with us in the conference room that he had carved out, and just sit in the pit, so to speak. And they said, no, can't do that. Directors have to have an office and it has to have a window in it. Mike's like, really? Oh, God. So there wasn't nearly as much opportunity for us to have casual conversations. So he had to take on more of that management-y aspect of things. So, and he wasn't my direct report. I actually reported to the project lead, guy by the name of Jay.
Oh, okay.
So, yeah.
And so where does, going from working as a day-to-day slinging code guy take you into sort of that next step? Was there always a desire to sort of move into an architect role or eventually into some of the teaching you did? How does that happen?
So in my case, entirely accidentally, in a lot of respects. I'd never really given a whole lot of thought to career progression, to be very blunt. I just, I'm slinging code and I'm happy. It's the late 90s. People want people to sling code. So I'll do that. And I'm living in Sacramento at the time. And, the Sacramento area is a wonderful area. But the problem is that or at least it did in the late 90s, it had a very definite upper ceiling on what you could make on an hourly basis slinging code.
Sure.
Asking for, $55, $60 an hour puts you really high up into that strata of, wow, you had really better be walking on water to be commanding those kinds of rates.
Sure.
And of course, the Silicon Valley was easily generating twice that. And so, at one point I was doing some work at Pacific Bell, and I was leaving actually to go take a job closer to home because they were an hour and a half commute. The job I was looking at was like a 30-minute commute. And the Pac Bell folks, the people I were working with, they said, hey, we're going to bring in a consultant to replace you, and we're going to charge him, he's going to be charging us $150 an hour. And I said, quote, oh, crap, pay me half that and I'll stay. And the project manager looked at me. And she just looked at me for a full 5 seconds and she said, wait here, and got up and left. And I looked at the other guy, the other project manager, Jeff, who actually was an old college buddy. And I said, Jeff, where's she going? And he just said, to keep you. I'm like, oh, crap, what have I just done? But sure enough, $75 an hour versus $150 an hour, $75 an hour for somebody who already knew the code base and understood what was going on versus $150 an hour for having to train somebody.
Yeah.
this was a no-brainer for the business. And so,
and that was in your head, you were thinking, why didn't I say 2/3? Why didn't I say 2/3?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Yes. I'm thinking, crap, pay me that and I'll stay. I mean, yeah, it was one of those. I really didn't think that they were, because I was so used to the Sacramento rates. Right? There's no way that I could get $75 an hour. Shortly after that, I was flipping through the pages. This was probably 99 timeframe. I was flipping through the pages of Java Report, and at the very, very back page, already I'm dating myself again because this was back when we had paper magazines.
There's still one, I think.
Yeah, I think it's MSDN, and I think they do the print copy because they like to hand it out at conferences. Code Magazine too. This was back in the day before, all the magazines were principally online. Right. How's that? How about we say it that way?
That's fairer to the friends that we both have in the print industry.
Exactly. Well, considering I write for both of those magazines I just named off, I probably should be more careful.
Yeah.
But I was flipping through the magazine, and in the very, very back, this little 8th size want ad, just this very small classified ad said DevelopMentor seeking Java and Java professionals. And I knew of DevelopMentor because I had a copy of Essential Com sitting on my shelf, and I had a copy of it. Yeah, I mean, it was if you were even remotely in the C++ world, and of course this was the time when Java was just beginning to make its presence felt within the world, and I'd been writing Java code for a couple of years at that point. But I knew who Don Box was. I knew who DevelopMentor was, and I respected them greatly. And I said, you know what? I kind of heard Aaron's voice in the back of my head, and I said, the worst possible thing that could happen here is that they laugh at me, maybe twice. I don't think I hold a candle to these guys, but I'm going to go take this shot. And so I, emailed DevelopMentor and, got in touch with the people there. The recruiter, we were talking. She says, I think you're kind of what we're looking for. I'm going to put you into a phone screen with a guy by the name of Owen Tallman. And I said, okay. And she said, what classes do you think you could teach? And I said, well, I could probably teach the RMI class. I know I could teach the Essential Java class. Probably couldn't do the EJB class. She said, okay, well, we'll have Owen, because he wrote the RMI class. We'll have him do a phone screen of you. And I said, okay, cool. And the appointed hour arrived, and Owen phoned me. And he said, we talked for a couple of minutes, just trying to get, basic social niceties out of the way. And Owen then said, okay, are you ready to do this? I said, absolutely, let's do this. And he said, all right, well, when we look at RMI, we can see that the stubs that, you can actually cast between all of the different interfaces that the stub implements, whereas in Corba, you actually have to kind of go back and cast it in a different way. What implications does this have about object identity and distributed systems? And I'm just like, I don't know. I really don't know. Let me think about that for the next hour. It was just this kind of, holy crap. He's asking me questions about things I have barely considered. I'm floored. I'm absolutely floored. I'm like, okay, yeah, this is exactly what I would have expected this interview to be like. And clearly I am not worthy. So hung up with Owen and waited a little bit. Peg, the recruiter, was going to give me a call after she talked to Owen. And sure enough, about an hour or so later, phone rings. It's Peg. I said, hey, Peg, I am so sorry for wasting your guys' time. I really am. And she said, why? I said, well, because, that was just, that was a terrible interview. She said, no, actually, Owen really liked you. You didn't try to bullshit your way through any answer. He thought you were, very smart, and, he thinks we should bring you in for a test stage. And I just kind of looked at the phone for a second and then said, did we talk to the same Owen Tallman? There's got to be some mistake here. There's got to be, but Owen told me later that he was absolutely reaching for, the very A-game material that he had. And he said, basically it was a question of, which of us gave up first, you or me, because I was really, pulling out the big guns. I'm like, wow, really? He's like, oh yeah. We want to know exactly where you're at, where your limits are. So I passed Owen, went down to DM, did a test teach. If I had known if I had been able to put faces to names of some of the people in the room when I did my test teach, I would have been vastly more nervous. But since I'd never met Keith Brown in person, I'd never seen Tim Ewald in person, I'd never seen a lot of these guys.
Yeah.
So I just saw a sea of faces out there as I was doing the test teach, because the test teach was you deliver a module on a subject of your choice to DevelopMentor employees and instructors in one of the rooms down in Torrance. And I'm so glad I didn't know who they were, because I would have been so much more nervous. And got past that and, started teaching for DevelopMentor. And, again, talking about luck, boy, that was one of the best things that's ever happened to me in my career, too. I mean, I got to know some amazing people. As a matter of fact, I had dinner 2 nights ago with Brian Randall, who's one of the guys that I met there.
Great guy.
And, just friendships that have lasted to this day, as well as, people that I, just love and respect deeply. I mean, I really enjoyed my time at DevelopMentor, and I sincerely wish things had ended differently for the company and the
Sure.
economy and all of that stuff, because it was just, I look back on those days with fondness. I really do.
Well, it's interesting because hearing your story of doing the interview made me think back to when I actually interviewed to teach comm for DevelopMentor. And same experience, talked to Peg, had a test teach, and I don't remember who. I'm not a test teach, a phone screen, and I don't remember who it was from. To be honest with you, I've gone back and tried to figure out who it was, and they came out of the gate same thing with these really tough questions. I think the first question was, can you describe the wire protocol of DCOM? I think that was one of the first questions, and I had somewhat the same experience you did, except I gave up. About 10 minutes in, I went, clearly you need someone that knows this and this deeper than I do, and and I gave up. I called and said, it doesn't look like it's a good match. I need to get my skills up. I don't remember what I said, but it's interesting because it may be, it may have been that I'd be teaching the comm course still to this day. Who knows? Because there was at that point in my career, if I thought someone was going to catch me in the you don't know what you're supposed to know, it really set me back a little. In fact, because I was going around Boston, where I was living at the time, as kind of one of the guys that knew comm pretty well, and then talked to DevelopMentor guys and completely put me in my place as far as I was concerned. Yeah. But if I knew the magic of not giving up, probably I knew enough. Do you know what I mean? And I think that's kind of an interesting lesson for people.
Oh yeah. Well, and from my time there, from later years, 2003, 2004 timeframe, that was a very deliberate interviewing path. That was absolutely something that we wanted to do. We wanted to know, if you're a candidate, we wanted to know where your edges were. We wanted to know where your boundaries were. Owen reaching for that A game material was a deliberate tactic, because we needed to know what you knew and what you didn't know, because, when you're teaching, obviously you need to be in a position where you can, answer, where you can deal with, questions of all levels. And, one of the things that you have to deal with is the fact that there are a lot of geeks. There are a lot of programmers. You step into a room like that, they're looking at you like, okay, what qualifies you to be at the front of this room as opposed to me?
Sure.
What makes you think you're so smart? You have to be able to deal with that, both in terms of a social level. You have to kind of know how to react when you realize that that's what's going on, number one. But number two, you really have to, know the material. And we want to know where your edges are.
Well, and I think there's probably also another piece of that, or at least it has been in the teaching I've done, and that is, how do you react when you don't know?
Exactly.
Right.
Yeah.
And the idea that he would be asking you questions, and to know that some percentage of the people out there are going to, try to BS you. You can't do that in front of a class when they're paying,
No way.
$2,000 to be in it. That's the wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And, the right thing to do there is to say, you know what, I'm not sure. And at least what I have found that works is to say, I don't know the answer to that question. Based on what I do know, I think the answer is this. If you need a deeper answer, if we need to verify that, because some people just ask because they're curious.
Right.
Do you know if? But you say, if this is something that, is important, certainly I can get back to other folks, or we can carve out some time after class and explore.
Right.
Let's write some code. Let's figure that out. And in some cases, if everybody in the room wants to know, okay, we'll do that right now.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And in other cases, if it's just one person, you say, how about you and me carve out some quality time after class? And, any day in which you, the instructor, discover something is a good day too.
Absolutely.
So, you're usually more than willing to do that. And a lot of times the students, the person who asked the question is like, well, no, I was just curious. If you find out, that'd be great. But, I don't want to stay after class to work it out. In which case you say, okay, clearly it's not a high priority for you.
Sure.
But yeah, being able to say, I don't know the answer to that question when you don't actually know the answer to that question is absolutely crucial if you want to gain the respect of the people in the room.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, you've been in this software game for a long time now. Mm-hmm. Where do you think software as a career is headed? So as a career, it's hard to say. The only constant in our industry is change, but in a lot of respects, it's really not that much different from what it was 40 years ago. Sure.
You can go and talk to people who were in this business back in the 60s and 70s, and in a lot of respects, we're still doing fundamentally the same thing. In the same way that farmers are still fundamentally doing the same thing as what they did 150 years ago. We have better tools. Yeah, exactly. The tools are very, very different. But in a lot of respects, it's still this game of talk to somebody who wants software built, figure out what they want, try to get inside their head to figure out what they want, and then seek to translate that into a form that the machine will understand. And that skill, people are often asking me, so do you think someday computers are going to replace all of what we do? And until a computer can figure out, it's not just natural language parsing, right? A computer can figure out what you say, but a computer cannot figure out what you mean, not yet, and quite possibly not ever. And until that happens, we as programmers are still going to be necessary. And as a result, there will really be, for those who get involved in writing code, there will be two paths in your career. One is the technical path and one is the management path, right? You learn to program, you work as a programmer for a while, and then at a certain point, you're going to be offered this opportunity to, instead of being the developer writing code, you're the person who's helping the developers write code. You're the one who's lining up resources and making sure they have machines and making sure they have access to the network and, doing a lot of those things where it's not really about you anymore. It's about what you can do for the team. And that requires a different mindset. And you have to be willing to say, okay, I now have to let go of the idea that, I need to be the smart one in the room. I need to make sure that the people I have working for me are the smart ones in the room. And, I basically have a goal, for the company I'm at, the iTrellis, where I'm the CTO. My goal is to walk into the room one day and look around the room, looking at all of my people and say, I am the dumbest guy in this room. I really want to be the dumbest guy in this room. Even though I'm trying like hell not to be. Right. I want to have people who are each smarter than me in some particular area, right? One guy may be really, really good at doing DevOps and automation. One guy may be really, really good at, working with particular NoSQL databases, whatever. I just want to know that there are people in that room who are smarter than me. Because it means I've done my job as a recruiting manager, as well as someone who's responsible for other people's career growth. I want to make sure that they are continuing to grow over and over and over again. And
want to stay because you're allowing them to do that.
Exactly. Encouraging them, in some cases, forcing them, because, if you're not interested in continuing to grow, I don't know that you're going to be a great employee.
Right.
So, that's a very different mindset, and not all people who like to sling code are going to be happy doing that, in which case you're going to be going down the path of, the technical track, which is to say you're going to, you're going to either pick a technology and master it in some form. I think of, for example, Anders or Brian Getz. Brian's a buddy of mine who works for Oracle. He is the Java language architect now. Mm-hmm. Brian will never work for another company again. I mean, where do you go after being the language architect at a company like Oracle or Microsoft?
Right.
Same thing for Anders.
Absolutely.
You might go to another of, Google, Microsoft, Oracle. Those guys may change jobs amongst those three companies, but not likely.
Yeah, they're not going to go to a startup to build a new language.
Yeah, exactly. They might found their own startup. But in that case, again, you're taking more of the management track. You're not really going down the technical path anymore.
Yeah.
Martin Odersky, perfect example. This is a guy who invented the Scala programming language, is now one of the principals involved over at TypeSafe, but he's not directly managing those guys. I don't think. He's trying to focus more on, doing what he does best, which is create the language and so forth.
Absolutely.
And at that, he's not really running the company. He's got somebody else being the CEO, and they've got, somebody else being the chief architect, and so on and so on. It's that technical track is, it's very appealing. And I spent probably 5 years of my life trying to decide which path I wanted to go down before I said, you know what, actually, I do feel like exploring the management curve. I've kind of gone down the technical side of things. And I kind of want to explore the management side of things before I decide what I want to be when I grow up.
And have you figured that out yet?
No, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet.
Yeah, as long as we don't grow up, that's all that matters to me.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, exactly. I figure I'm just going to, sit at home and play video games all day.
Isn't that what you do as a manager?
Hey, it's email. We do email.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I really appreciate you doing the show. You bet.
Well, I mean, we've been talking about doing it for a while, and the first time we tried, I actually had something come up, management-y, and the second time you got married.
I did get married.
So, I don't know if
you're blaming my wife
wisely,
for us not doing the show before now.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yeah, see, I get to do that, but you don't. Just keep that in mind.
I will keep that in mind. Well, thanks for your time, and I'm sure we'll run into each other soon.
Oh yeah, well, you're coming up for MVP Summit, right?
Nope, I will be on the road for a year.
Oh, that's right. I forgot. You're going to be
during the MVP Summit. I think we're going to be in Istanbul.
Ooh, so that sounds like fun.
I'm not coming.
Okay, well,
this is the first one.
Then, we will probably see you at the next summit, or I'm sure I'll run into you at some conference or something.
I'm positive. So. Well, you have a great day there in Seattle, and I need to get some sleep. It's almost 1 a.m. here in Paris.
Oh, my goodness. But it's the city of lights. It's all,
it is. That's why we've got the blinds closed.
All right. Well, enjoy Paris. And if you get the chance, there's a great little street market on Avenue du President Wilson, right there near the Eiffel Tower.
Oh, nice.
Amazing roasted chickens. Charlotte and I discovered that when we were out there for a conference a couple of years ago. I think it's a Tuesday, Saturday kind of thing.
Cool.
If you can, definitely try to get out there.
We definitely will.
It's like a farmer's market, but there was this one stall where they've got these rotisserie chickens on spits, and the grease all drips into the bottom, where they have a bunch of roasted potatoes just soaking up that grease. Damn, I'm hungry now.